Hey folks, welcome to the podcast. This is a bit of a special edition, and I'll give you a quick context. That is, a few days ago, I invited Toby back on the podcast to talk about what we can do about preparing for a difficult winter, especially in Europe with energy prices going through the roof. Obviously, Toby's an expert on survival, urban survival, Arctic survival, and much more. So we did a long talk about that, but we kind of figured that we were getting lost in tangents the way we like to do, because that's just how we talk, and it might be not clear enough for the listeners. So what we're doing right now is recording an extra episode, and in this one, Toby will give you a lot of information about his model of the 7 pillars that you need for urban survival. And it works quite well. Now, it needs a little bit of explanation, and we're going to do that now. But I would suggest that for more in-depth, I would suggest you listen to the longer podcast episode, that I will release immediately after this one. All the links will be in the show notes. It's all going to be there. There's a bonus episode on Patreon as well. There's a bunch of stuff. But long story short, shorter, very practical episode right now, and then in-depth stuff coming right after this one. All right, and with that, I yield the floor to Toby.
Awesome. Thank you, Wim. Hi to everyone. First, I'll apologize for just having my green screen in the background, but having the artificial background really messes with some of the practical things I want to show you today, so you'll understand why as we go on. The 7 pillars model, it was basically created between myself and Selka, my business partner that I work extensively on the urban preparedness landscape with, from his experience going through the Balkans conflict 30 years ago and up to the modern time and everything in between. And what we found was that the model really was born out of necessity, that we're giving people initially on our in-person and online courses for the last 10 years, a lot of really valuable information, a lot of really good information, good techniques, good tips. But they very quickly hit this sort of saturation point of, okay, I get it, but I just don't know where to put this. They had no framework or structure to hang it off, and so they just became overwhelmed with information. So we went back to the drawing board, and actually over quite a period of time refined this model. So it was over 3 years we really refined it to what it became today, and then we've been teaching it for the past 7 years very, very successfully. And what this aims to do is basically help you prioritize, manage your time, effort and resources and money in regards to building an effective preparedness strategy. Okay, and today's very much the context but the detail of that, and we'll also be sharing down in the comments a link to an article I've written that also gives some of this breakdown in a form that you can read after listening or print out and kind of go through it very sequentially. Okay, so let's just start with the basic concept. Okay, here's me dressed up smartly for this interview.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So, and just a quick reminder for the folks only listening on the podcast version and not watching us on YouTube. This is definitely an episode in which I would suggest watching the YouTube version, because Toby's going to use props and give a good explanation. I won't be able to visually describe everything. That's not going to work.
Okay. I'll do my best to give a description as we go, but definitely I'd recommend watching the video. Okay, so this is little Lego man standing on this bleak white Arctic landscape, which is where I live, completely unprotected from the world around him. All right, and what I basically want to do for this person is build this roof of resilience over his head, okay, or their head. And this basically, the roof of resilience is what shelters me from all of the stuff that the world's going to throw at me previously and in the near future. So the principle is, I want this roof to sit on a strong, stable, well-built platform. And that is what the 7 pillars is. Because historically, when we look at preparedness models, here's a lot of the problem. We analyze a situation and we get very, very concerned about it. And typically folks panic and they basically think, this is what the solution is. I'm going to throw all of my time, effort and money, which is represented by these Lego bricks in this bowl. Okay, so these are your resources, time, effort, money, resources. And I'm going to throw all of it at one thing, which I think is the priority. And for most people, especially in the European context, that's going to be food. Okay, so what they'll do is they'll go out and they will buy an inordinate amount of food and build up that pillar. Okay, so this is their sort of You know, they went and dropped €1,000 on a year's worth of dehydrated meals that lives in their basement. Okay. Now, that does indeed give me a roof over my head, but a very, very unstable roof. If any weight is applied anywhere else on this roof of resilience, it's going to collapse. Can we all agree with that as a kind of concept? Wim?
That makes perfect sense. So, and this is also a really great analogy. And I particularly like the use of the Lego blocks, because I mean, even a child can get this. You need to support that roof with more than one pillar.
Right.
That just, there's no other way. If you think you don't have to, well, and as you will go into more detail about, is that all the other things that are on this planet that will get you, they eventually, shit happens. The Murphy's Law happens, and just very predictable things will happen as well when it comes to austerity and difficult circumstances to live in. It's pretty much inevitable. How bad will it get? Nobody knows, but that's why you build that roof as sturdy as you possibly can.
Exactly. So it's tempting to then say, fine, so long as I've got 2 pillars, then I'm good. And this is the American model of food and guns, right? But then notice, very intentionally in the model, all the weight of that roof is then on my head. Okay, that is that amount of mental pressure you're putting on you, because it's like, I've got my food and my means to defend it, and I don't need anything more. This is a very, very flawed model. And this is why Selco, tragically, and I, for many years, have not only been teaching our preparedness model, but also resisting against the American preparedness model, can we say, because it's got some fatal flaws within there. And we're not saying that to be against anybody else that's out there teaching and training. People are coming at this with a good spirit and a good heart, but just lacking context and experience, quite simply. Okay. So what we obviously need is a much more well-rounded, well-structured foundation to rest my roof of resilience on. And that's where the 7 pillars actually comes in. So I'm going to name those now. And we've gone old school today because you need to start getting used to this. All right. Technology is going to go away soon. So we're going proper old school. Now, for anybody that does any kind of survival training, the first 4 are going to be very recognizable to you, because they are actually the 4 priorities of survival. Okay. Water, shelter, fire, and food. And that is effectively what we as humans need to survive, by dictionary definition, to preserve our ongoing existence. Okay. What we've then got is the parts that come in that are a little bit more urban specialization. So then our signaling / communication, our medical / hygiene, and our personal safety. Now, I'm just going to illustrate the point about what we want to do the pillars, and then we're going to go into each pillar briefly, but in a little bit more detail, just to give you some context. So instead of building up one pillar very, very tall from the get-go, what I want to be doing, again, using my Lego blocks as an illustration, is building each pillar a little bit at a time until I've got all 7 pillars down. So this is giving me a much more well-rounded context. So even though, so I've gone along and put 1 block on each pillar, even though my roof is very, very low, it's very, very stable. Okay. Now we can start to effectively allege these blocks are sort of time. What this pillars is doing is buying me time on each level. So the taller this structure is, the longer I can go in any disaster situation, being completely self-sufficient. Okay. So I've just taken the roof off, so you can see I've got my 7 pillars down there. They're not in any particular sequence just now. I'm just building them up. But as I invest more time, energy, and resources, it isn't about growing one pillar above the others. It's about growing every single pillar sequentially, going around until I'm all the way back to the beginning, and then I start over again. I just want to get to this next stage real quick.
Yeah. Well, and that makes perfect sense. I think this is what very often is maybe not necessarily a tragic flaw, but it can be, is that as humans, we often tend to focus on the pillars that we feel comfortable with or that we have experience with. And then the other ones that, for instance, you mentioned, guns, personal protection. For many Americans, this will not be that too difficult to understand. For Europeans who don't have a Second Amendment, where firearms ownership is very different, a lot of them are like, ooh, weapons, ooh, self-protection. Like, no, that's what the police is for. Oh, yes, but we're talking about a different situation in which that becomes problematic.
Excellent. So we're at this stage now. I've just got 2 blocks on each pillar. Okay, so I'm in there. You see I'm in there. I'm lying down. I'm quite comfortable. I have this very strong, stable roof on top of me. And for some people, that's it. That's all you need. You've just built up that solid foundational resilience. That means, in an ideal term, our measure on this is I could effectively close my door and stay home for 1 week and not interact with society or anybody else in any other way, and be completely self-sufficient within the space I'm living in. Okay. If you want to carry on building those pillars, you would carry on exactly the same model. All right. And it would just, all it's doing is buying you more time, more resilience, and quite simply creating more room inside here. So right now it's just me, but if I've got my family, I need more room and more height. If I've got friends, additional family, I need more room, more height. And that will dictate how much time, energy, investment I actually put into it. Again, hopefully this is not a particularly difficult concept to understand. I'm just going to build this model up a little bit to its sort of final iteration, Wim. So I'm going to let you talk just for a couple of minutes while I do that, and then we'll get into the nuts and bolts of the actual the pillars themselves.
Yeah. I hope that everybody who's listening and watching understands this model. It's not that complicated, and it makes perfect sense. You don't build a house with just one wall and try to put a roof on top of it. You put all the walls in, you have support structures and so on, and that makes for a sturdy, livable house that will keep you sheltered, safe as much as it needs to in a prolonged manner, as opposed to something that's just going to be torn down by the first gust of wind or heavy rain that arrives. So a lot of this is what we discussed before in the previous episodes, and also in the main one that we did on Monday, is about mindset. And one of the things we also covered that I'd like to repeat here is that what you're doing is explaining a model. The implementation of that model will differ from one person to the next. Everybody has their own specific circumstances. If you live in a huge metropolitan area in an inner city, or if you live out in the woods in the middle of nowhere, and everything in between, it's going to be very, very different. So we're giving you as much as possible a framework with a little bit more detail, but how far exactly you have to take certain things, it's going to depend entirely on you, but the model still applies.
Excellent. Thank you, Wim. So now we've got this very strong, very well built, very, very stable model with all the pillars built up there and lots of room for me to last a long time, or for other people to come in as needed. Okay. Now, if you're one of those people that just has to go for the top end of this and say, right, the only way I could possibly improve this is by having a slight angle on the roof to encourage those storms and that weather to run off. Okay, I'll cater for you guys today because we're all going to be using this soon. Then what I'd be doing is just putting a little bit extra, a little bit more time, a little bit more energy, a little bit more effort, possibly a little bit more money onto those front 3 pillars, that then just gives me that very nice final angle for the storm to run off away on the back there. And these 3 pillars would be food, medical and hygiene, and signaling and communication. So if I'd got everything up to a super duper level standard and just wanted to go the extra mile, that's the 3 pillars that I'd put the effort into. Okay. Now what we're going to do is just go through each pillar briefly in turn to say, what are we talking about here? All right. Whilst these are not in particular order per se, this is not necessarily a bad order to do them in, especially because we're starting with water. Okay. And all of these are quite actionable at home to get you warmed up before you get into some of the parts a little bit more challenging, possibly for individuals or family members. Okay, so treat this as the sort of the easy warm up to get into the sort of the main set, bearing in mind you're putting 1 brick on each pillar to begin with. So why start with water? quite simply because it is so vital to life. Okay, you are not going to go long without water before you're going to get real, profound problems from dehydration or hygiene issues or whatever the case may be. Now, this is where we get a little bit of a fatal flaw right out the gate, that especially in Western society, we just cannot perceive a society where we don't have access to potable, easily available water. Even if the taps stop running, we assume something's going to turn up very near in our neighborhood and we can just immediately go and gather water from there. Okay. Sadly, historical precedent does not have your back on this one. Okay. So what most people do on the water pillar is they'll go out and buy a bunch of water and sort of throw it in the corner and be like, done. What's next? Okay. Now that could be your first brick. Okay. The first brick could just be go out and buy, an amount of water and keep it in storage. Issues you've got there is it's bulky and it's heavy. Okay, so it takes up room, and depending on where you're storing it, you might start collapsing your IKEA furniture or whatever the case may be. And if that falls on the kid's head, the wife's not going to be happy about it, whatever. Tied in with that is we often grossly underestimate our water usage. Okay, so we might be saying, on an average person, for ideal hydration, you want to be drinking 2 to 2.5 liters of water a day. That's correct. As an absolute minimum. Okay. So Wim, I'm going to come back to you in a second. I'm just going to get to do a quick calculation in your head that if you wanted to have water stored at home for the people and pets that are resident in your premise for a week, 7 days, how much water you'd have. I'll just let you calculate that now while I keep on talking.
But
okay?
Dude, you're asking the wrong guy to calculate, because I suck at math.
So this is one of the first exercises you want to do, is actually to calculate our water requirement. Now, bear in mind that 2.5 liters per person per day is the absolute bare minimum. And then pets depends completely the size of your pet. A budgie maybe is taking 100 mil. My dogs are probably taking 1.5 liters each. So that's a significant amount of extra water. And this isn't covering any other requirement, rehydration of food, hygiene, flushing toilets, anything like that. Okay, so your absolute minimum requirement, Wim, what have you got?
35 liters.
35 liters, right?
Absolute minimum.
Absolute minimum. That's a fair amount of water. Okay, bear in mind, each liter is going to weigh 3 pounds or just under 2 kilos. That's looking, 70 kilos of water, like 140 pounds in weight that you've got to store somewhere. And then the bulk. This is where people start to trip themselves up. Fine, 35 liters. I'll get myself 2 20-liter jerry cans, fill those with water, put them in the corner of the bathroom. Brilliant. Until someone has to lift one up. Now, if you're the size of Wim, you can lift them both up and probably do some cool exercises with it. All right. But if the kids come around and they need to get it, or your mom, or, somebody else with a smaller build, they're immediately going to start to struggle to actually move that water around just by the sheer bulk, and probably end up spilling more of it than they use in the process of trying to decant it into cups, bottles, whatever the case may be. So even if we start with our bare minimum of water, we need to be storing it in a size container that we can actually efficiently utilize. So top tip from me, one of the things I like to do is just keep and clean out drinks bottles, like 2-liter pop bottles or water bottles or things like that, and just refill those and keep my water that way. So I'm just keeping it in that smaller, more manageable quantity, a little bit more versatile in being able to store it in different places. Instead of having 2 big lumpy 20-liter containers, I've got small bottles I can kind of squirrel around the place. Okay. That is your bare minimum. Bare minimum. You probably want to be easily doubling that for a week's worth. Okay, so now you're getting to 70 liters, double the weight, and you see where we're going from here. All right. If we get into that ideal world, if I want to have 3 weeks sort of self-sufficiency, that is a major quantity of water. Right? This is like load-bearing structure problematic quantities of water now. And if it starts to crack or leak, this is like insurance level damage of water. All right. So we've got to start looking at the nuance of those layers, that I don't just want to be able to store water in a quantity and a size that I can easily access. I need to be thinking on my subsequent bricks about where would I source water from? How would I gather that water and transport that water, and then potentially purify or sterilize that water, and then store that in what to be potable? Because if I've got it from a river and I put it in my pot and I boil it, I can't put that back in the container I got from the river, right? Because that's contaminated.
Yeah.
So this is where the nuance comes in. So water's the easy one. That's the easy one to get started, purely because right now we have potable water. So I can just get containers and start to fill them. But it can also mean in the event of a disaster where we get any amount of prior notification, even minutes, what we will do is have a clear action plan to open the taps and start filling containers, fill your bathtub, fill the sink, to just have water available. Okay. Don't want to get over detailed in this right now, but it's just to give you that sort of context, right? So that's where we're at with water as our first pillar. Please do not see it as a one and done. Go and buy it, stick it in the corner. That's it. Quick point on storage. Water will store a lot longer than people imagine. In my storage plan, if I've got it in a cool, dark place, which I have, it's in the basement under the stairs, that water will actually sit for 1 year in those containers, no problem. And I've got 12 20-litre containers as my bulk store plus more. So what I'll actually do is empty out 3 of those 20-litre containers every quarter, every 3 months, and refill them and then rotate them. What I don't want to do is empty out all 12 in one go, because that's the point the bomb's going to drop, isn't it? And then I'll really be kicking myself. Okay. So I do this on a very sort of rotational basis of just emptying the water out. And that's how I bought them. I actually bought 3 containers and filled them. And then over the next three or 4 months, just bought a container a month and filled it. So that was how I kind of filled my stocks over a period of year. Notice what I'm doing there. It's this incremental plan. I didn't go out one day with 10,000 euros and dump it on everything. It's a bad plan. You want to do this incrementally, methodically, logically, and with spousal buy-in, or in a way they don't see that you're doing it. Those are your 2 options. All right. Drop 10,000 euros in a day. Trust me, they're going to notice. All right. I'm going to stop at the end of each pillar, Wim, just to see if you've got any reflections or questions or thoughts. So that's the basic premise of water. Over to you.
Yeah, the biggest thing that I want to mention here is how for a lot of people they'll instinctively go to the reflex of like, oh, they're exaggerating. That would never happen here. And I'm like, okay, I get that reflex. It's very modern Western society of you to think like that. But I would offer, well, it doesn't even have to be. But look at Ukraine right now, where all the infrastructure is being destroyed. Kiev is how many people are out of electricity and running water right now. And it doesn't have to be war. It could be something else. It could be if we've talked about this before. We talked about this in the episode that we recorded on Monday, is how our infrastructure that we need to have a modern lifestyle where there is potable water coming out of the faucet every day, 24/7. There's no issues. That also runs on energy. That also runs on systems that need maintenance, that need spare parts, and so on. So if you're not paying attention, there has been a gigantic amount of industry that is either slowing down or shutting down in Europe, and they're maybe never opening again, some of them. So there is an increased risk that the infrastructure will crumble or even break. Will it happen? Nobody knows. How bad would it get? Nobody knows. But pretending that infrastructure is made of adamantium, the mythical steel that Wolverine has his skeleton in and it's unbreakable, that is just naive. That is just, incredibly naive. So take the advice Toby is giving, and just like you said, incrementally. You don't have to. If you can miss the 10,000 euros, you're doing okay. If you could do that and your spouse doesn't notice it, you're probably going to be fine. Okay, back to you.
Thank you. One quick anecdote from me, drawing it down to a localized scale, not war, not disaster, not cyber terror, anything. And we can be a victim of policy. So yeah. I live in a small village, and a few years ago, there was a break-in at the water tower that is the central facility that provides all the potable water to this village. And everybody strongly suggested it was kids messing around and broke in on a Friday night. We'd had some low-level, arson, graffiti, disorderly conduct. It fit the profile, right? But who was going to sign off to say that's just kids breaking in and we're not worried about it? Right? No one. Chief of police did the right thing, threw it to the municipality and said, what do you want us to do? As a crime scene is secured, we've got the evidence. Are you happy that water's okay? Or do you think that's been tampered with now? The municipality said, no, who's going to sign off on this? They said, we're going to get the scientists to come in. So 8 p.m. Friday night, like, let's just ring a convenient scientist to come and do a water sample. Right. That took a while. Fortunately, they found someone, came and took a sample by midnight. By then, the shops have sold out of water already because they've shut the water off as a cautionary measure, overabundance of caution. Saturday morning, who's going to culture and provide that sample? Right now, we're ringing and people are getting called in off holiday and this, that, and the other. And yep, by Saturday morning, somebody started to culture the sample and they said it's going to take 48 hours. So it'll be Monday morning before we can give you an answer. Right? That's the whole weekend gone, no water. There is an emergency contingency. The pump house opened and the fire department was there with the tap, and you could go and get water if you had containers to fill. All right. Guess what sold out Saturday morning? Yeah, every single container in the near area. Monday morning, the results came back and we said, as far as the samples goes, we're clear. This is the scientists, but we didn't test for everything. We just tested for like the usual suspects. If you want us to test for everything, that could be like 7 to 9 days. You know, if you want like the full bioterrorism suite, or you can just dump the water, clean the tower and refill it. Right. I don't know how many 100,000 liters of water is in this tower, but many of them. So again, called the specialist cleaning crew, onwards and upwards. By Wednesday, the tower was refilled. Everybody was reconnected. So that one thing, that door getting broken into, led to 6 days of no water at people's taps, just because by policy, no one wanted to be the one to say, we're going to sign off on that and say it's safe, because nobody wanted, an outbreak on their hands, whatever the case may be. That's a very real context, And, Scallies aren't lost on this. You don't need to have a bioweapon to put in the water source. You can just make it look like that might have happened and everybody's going to follow the sequential steps like it did. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So great lesson learned, and I refer that in a lot of my lessons, which is why I'm just putting it there now. All the way through to the Ukraine side of things, but it can be that simple. Someone broke in somewhere, even a nuisance kiddie did it, but the whole policy says we can't assume that's what it is, and we're going to treat this like an actual terrorist incident type thing until we're proved wrong or somebody else is willing to sign off on it. All right. So, pillar 2, shelter. This is quite an easy one because we're going to start at home naturally, okay? But what we need to think about is, what are we sheltering from? So typically we're looking at our environmental threats. So for here, we're coming into winter now. So we're looking at extreme weather, high winds, rain, snow, ice, very cold temperatures. And if all of my infrastructure goes down, so my water's switched off, my electricity's turned off, my access to heating's turned off, can I maintain the integrity of my shelter to protect me from the elements within it? That's my first question. But then in an urban environment, we're looking at the additional threats I will want to protect myself from. Okay. And this is typically then our animal threats, both 2-legged and 4-legged, right? How secure can I make my shelter or my premise from not only people trying to access that I don't want them to, but this was a really interesting point. I don't know if you remember, Wim, early on in the pandemic, in the first wave, about the rats that were overrunning New York City and various other places, just because the trash wasn't getting collected like it normally was. As society slowed down in the first lockdowns, all of those mitigation measures that controlled those rodent populations and the companies that control those populations suddenly weren't there anymore. So within one breeding cycle of the rats, which is 12 days, if I remember correctly, you just sort of unchecked explosion in the population, and restaurants got shuttered, and owners were going in weekly just to kind of check everything was okay. And these just became rat hotels within those first 14 days to flatten the curve. So it's, again, not without case precedent on this, that the animal threat and the human threat and the environmental threat is what we're considering within our shelter. That might be, we're lucky we're just down to rolling brownouts. So I've got an amount of supply each day, all the way through to, in our natural phenomenon, our storms, our hurricanes, our, tsunamis, whatever the case may be, my shelter might get put off grid for a prolonged period of time. multiple days, if not weeks, depending on what's actually caused this situation in the first place. Now, again, I can't get into all of the, specific actions you would need to do around shelter, other than it needs to be methodical, logical, and germane to sort of the threats that you feel you're facing, up to and including, we are talking about larger escalation in Europe now in terms of warfare and biohazards and nuclear threats and things like that. Do with that as you will. All right. So those typically are at the top of the pillars. The foundational stuff is going to be, can you stay warm? Can you stay safe? Can you stay hidden? Those are sort of main priorities at the lower level. Again, back to you, Wim.
Yeah, and this is going to be very, very different for everybody. I mean, whether you live in an apartment building, it's going to be radically different than if you maybe live in a big city, but you've got a small house there in maybe the older part of the city where that is still typically there, or you live in the suburbs, or you live in a quiet small little town where everybody knows everybody. All this will vary widely. So you're going to have to really look at your own circumstances and maybe come to the conclusion that there's no ideal solution for you. And then you're still going to have to do the best you can.
Yeah, it is now about improvise and adapt. That's a great point, Wim, that it's just now, make and do with what you've got. Okay, then we're coming to our third point, which is fire. Now, this is where we start to get really nice into the nuance of the model, because this is actually a sort of twofold consideration here. So first of all, fire in the survival context of the means to heat and possibly the means to eat. So I've actually got the ability to impart warmth into my shelter. That could be, a gas burning stove or a wood burning stove or a heater or something similar to that. And possibly the ability to boil water to make it safe and to prepare meals or, food, drink, or whatever the case may be. So that's our one element. But then here's where it gets interesting. At a time that potentially society is very vulnerable and it's not working normally, and all of the emergency resources are either absent or overstretched, at that moment, I'm now introducing significant additional fire hazards into my home by means of candles, camping stoves, or things I'm unfamiliar with using. All right. Yeah. So within our fire, it's not only the means to sort of, heat and eat, but it's very much the ability to detect and suppress fire along with it. All right. Bearing in mind, in certain circumstances, we may become our own fire department, our own pharmacy, our own school, our own hospital, our own kitchen, our own, our own whatever, because those services are just unavailable or overstretched right now. Okay. So I need to be thinking about, along with my fire, I want to have my fire detectors, my smoke sensors, my fire blankets, my fire extinguishers, and not just have the stuff, know how to use it and place it in the appropriate position. So if I need to use it in emergency, it's immediately to hand. This is what terrifies me about some of the advice we get in Europe about building this like emergency supplies box, krislåda in Swedish, the crisis box, and you put all your bits and bobs in there and you kind of tuck it under the stairs in the event of an emergency. Having a fire blanket tucked underneath in a storage cupboard when the fire's happening on my stove is no good for anybody. So I need to be making sure this critical equipment is pre-positioned to be used in the event of an emergency. And in the event of an emergency, everybody in my household knows how to use it. Okay. If my teenage daughter's using the camp stove to make popcorn, because that's what's going to make her feel better, and she sets that on fire, it's no use her running to tell me she set fire to something. She needs to deal with that immediately whilst yelling at me she set fire to something. Okay. So this is where we've got that kind of two considerations on one pillar, and that comes through in some additional pillars here as well. Okay, Wim, over to you.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. And I think that's also a point that needs repeating, is that it's never just about you. We covered this in the other episode, is that the idea of the lone survivor, it does exist. There are people who are out there like that, but as we mentioned there's a price to pay for that one often. And in the vast majority of the cases, that is the most difficult path to take. Whereas community can be just you and your spouse, can be you and your spouse and kids, can be a little bit more people that you take in. but everybody needs to be more or less on the same page when it comes to this. And there are minimum requirements, I would call it, minimal skills that you need to develop to or have to live in such a situation. If you have, like you said, you have a teenage daughter. My kids are fortunately in their 20s, so I'm beyond that point. But they've never had responsibility like that before. That's going to be a steep learning curve. So if you want to prepare, then one thing that I would suggest is that you need to have a little bit of a groundwork established already when it comes to, right, we're not in a situation in which things are as normal. Normal is not going to be happening for a little while if we're really out of luck with things that can go wrong. So everybody needs to be able, especially the teenagers and the children, to kind of listen to what the parents say. It's not the time to rebel and revolt. Maybe now it's time to just do as you're told and take things seriously. Just like you said, you need food. There's no electricity. You're cooking on a campfire. You set fire to the kitchen. Yeah, just you don't get a hall pass to go sit somewhere. No, you need to deal with it, like you said, as you yell for somebody else to come help you. It's like, okay, take action right now. There's no waiting, because what happens if you wait, everything gets worse, including for you and everybody else.
Excellent. Thank you, Wim. So then we're coming on to our fourth pillar, our food. Okay. Now this is very, very individualistic. We can give you some broad sort of general guidance, but everybody's going to eat differently. Everyone's got different diets. Everyone's got different requirements. Everyone's got access to different things. Quite simply, what we're looking at as a first rule is I want to store what I eat and eat what I store. Okay, so this idea, I'm just going to buy this foreign food, this dehydrated military rations, 1 month supply, and stick them in the cupboard. In the emergency, I'll eat that. And then the first time you try cooking it or tasting it, you realize this stuff is absolutely foul. That's just all the wrong way to go about it. Okay. So what you want to be doing, there should be no emergency food supply. It should just be more of the food that you're used to eating. Okay. So this is an easy way to start on this is, as you're out shopping, if you shop daily or for every other day or once a week, just add 1 or 2 extras of whatever it is you're buying, and then just have that slight depth to your stores and do that a couple of times. And before you know it, you've got like a week's worth of food in the house that you're comfortable with and familiar and happy eating. Now, here's the harder part is that can't all just be fresh food if that's what you're used to eating, because that's not going to keep a week in the event of the infrastructure going down. So these need to be shelf stable foods, so tinned foods or dried foods or similar, that are either require no preparation or very little preparation. Okay, so there might be an element of sort of, I don't particularly like this thing, I'll buy a few sort of noodle packs or whatever. I'm not going to eat them in the first instance, but I know I can tolerate them and they're there and they're good to go kind of thing. Okay, so bearing in mind, we're doing this a brick at a time. So start off easy. Do not go out and throw an inordinate amount of money at deep food stockpiles. That is not going to work for you. If you're tempted to go and buy those emergency rations, the military rations, the MREs, buy one first and try it. And have everybody in the family try it. And if they're all like, this is amazing, yummy, I love it, can't get enough of this, they're lying, first of all. And secondly, it gets really tired after 3 or 4 days. Okay, so balance your food stores accordingly. Now, here's where we've got the fun part, because it should be fun. It should be enjoyable. You should get a return on your investment. Okay, what we're looking at in these early stages of like my find my food is probably getting some sort of camp stove or similar and some shelf stable foods, possibly some tinned goods or whatever the case may be. Use them, practice, get that family buy-in, sit down with a spouse, say, I'll cook dinner tonight. Oh, wonderful. What are we going to have? this instant mashed potato and these meatballs and gravy made on my little campfire stove or camp stove. With the light switched off and with candlelight, so it's romantic. Okay, so it just starts you getting used to the equipment you've actually got, how to use it safely, some things to think about, and don't make it scary and terrifying. Okay, nobody wants that, especially with the fatigue levels that we're already at post-pandemic. So as you buy this stuff in, read the instructions, use it, utilize it, but not in isolation. Not I've lit my camp stove and I took my meatballs in gravy and I heated it in the microwave and I can eat them. At some point, start to bring all of this together and then understand that process, and then look at your camp pot from your mashed potatoes and meatballs and gravy after you've eaten it, and then think, how much water from my water storage is it going to take to clean this thing now? Right? And you can even try that. Take one of your 2-litre pot bottles filled with water and just see, what does it actually take? Or do I need to now put more fuel to heat that water to make it clean and hygienic, wherever you go from there? That's one of the simplest things you can do. Kids love it, by the way, especially the lilies. It's a big adventure. You make it, throw sheets over the furniture and make it a camping trip, whatever the case may be. Make sure it's safe. You're well ventilated if you're doing this indoors. But this is what you need to do, is not just accumulate the things, but immediately put it into practice. Okay.
Yeah, and another aspect of that I often try to explain to people. I'm used to it because I have been living out of my car for the past almost 30 years, ever since I started working as a full-time personal trainer. I'm used to eating on the go. Food for me, for let's say 99%, is just functional. I need food to stay alive, so I'm going to eat. There's a little bit of preference obviously involved, and there's stuff that I really don't want to eat, Brussels sprouts, but survival is something else. I counted this like with my girlfriend. She loves to eat. Eating is important for her. It's a social function. It's a lot of stuff, and she really likes, she cooks extremely well, so that's important to her. So we often have this kind of disconnect where I'm like, whatever, it's fine, it's food. And she's like, no, I want to eat this, or do you want this or that? I'm like, I don't care, just whatever. Like, no, tell me what you want. I'm like, well, okay, how about this? Yeah, but we had that like last week. So if this is a very Western mindset, fortunately, I've been able to convince her of if we live in more austere times, that's going to go away. But this mindset shift is for a lot of people necessary. Is what you said, I think, makes perfect sense. Try to get to the food that you normally eat, but do realize that you're in a different environment at that point in time, where it's not just about making the food you normally eat and love, but it is about surviving at the same time. And eventually you might get to the point where you make compromises. Like, okay, well, we're not going to have the gravy with this meal, even though it tastes awesome, because it's going to be limited amounts of it, or it might take too much water to clean the dishes afterwards. Might be a variety of reasons where your meals become a lot more sober, but they do have all the nutrients in it, which is the purpose of the meal. So having this mindset shift a little bit in advance, understanding that, okay, if we have rolling blackouts, like the mayor of Berlin said that are going to happen for about 3 hours at a time, and not if but when. I hope it doesn't happen, but that's what the mayor says. So sure, they know what they're saying over there. That you're not freaking out like, oh my god, I can't have my favorite meal right now. It's like, no, you knew this was coming. Okay, prepare for it, and just remember that this too will pass eventually. But in the meantime, make sure you don't go hungry because this doesn't taste so good. So I'm not going to eat it. That's not an option.
Excellent, Wim. Thank you. And yeah, governments are clearly communicating with their people to manage their expectations now. And that's why we're doing this recording, to help people with that, quite simply. This is not ifs now. This is whens. So this is the time to prepare. So coming to our fifth pillar then, signaling and communication. Again, this is one of those that's, split into two, and we've actually managed to write it out. So by signaling, what I'm talking about here is the actual hardware, for want of a better word. Our devices that we use to communicate. So it can be, you've got your phone, have you got like a power bank or backup batteries, so you can keep that charged or topped up or whatever the case may be, especially in rolling brownouts, because that's one of our primary communication devices. It may well be having small walkie-talkies with batteries and such. So in the event of, everything sort of going off no 4G or no cellular network, no battery in my phone, I've at least got the ability, if I'm going to go outside to check something and I'm leaving the family inside, we've just got some simple two-way communication that I can let them know, you know, what's going on, what I'm seeing, or whatever the case may be. Great example, if I'm going out to the car, you know, and I want them to follow on, I might go first to check everything's okay, and then either give a pre-approved signal to on the horn. There's a communication device, by the way, or just get onto the walkie-talkie to let them know, yeah, I'm at the car, everything's fine, like come on down now, whatever the case may be. This is where people start to throw stupid money at stupid things. All right, so think it through contextually on what do you need and what are you going to use and how are you going to use it. But then the communication part is that twofold again. Not only the effective, correct use of the device, so you use your walkie-talkies correctly that everybody can understand what's being said and you can speak with clarity and ambiguity and with brevity. That's a big part of voice procedure. But it's also in that bigger scale of just general communication. Now, this was the fascinating part of the pandemic for me, that how critical did that skill become? Just that ability in a calm, measured, clear, brief manner to be able to discuss with people. One, first of all, a lot of people wearing face masks. So we immediately had an actual barrier to effective communication because we don't realize how much we read off people's facial expressions and how quick it is to start losing understanding when that's blocked on both parties or more. And also as the tension rose and people were just tense in everyday situations, just going to the supermarket, just going to work, just going anywhere, doing anything, that ability to not only communicate effectively, but actively listen became like the gold stock, right? And you could see the people that couldn't do it and some of the consequences they faced. And the longer things went on, the more tense it became, the more vital those active listening and communication skills came to bear. And then like this, we became in an entirely online digitized world that suddenly there's just this head and shoulders configuration of me and I'm meant to be doing all my business like normal. So, you know, how did we make that work? That was all about effective communication. And then we hit that, the golden era of Zoom, didn't we? You got the rules at the beginning. Everybody's got their cameras on, microphones on mute, raise your hand if you need to, use the chat box for this, that and the other. Oh, wonderful. That's what it's that soft skills that we're talking about. So the signaling is that hard skill, the use of the device, the technical application of the device, the communication is that soft skill, not only be able to use the device effectively, but be an effective communicator, of which a large part is being an effective listener. And then we're plugging into obviously all our de-escalation skills in the personal safety side of things we're coming on to a little bit later. And this, I'm sure you've got quite a few thoughts on, Wim.
Yeah, this one's difficult because in many regards, I mean, people are not ready for disaster to strike. We saw that with the pandemic. There was lots of nonsense and lots of people panicking. Some rightfully so, others not so much. At the same time, we live in a time when technology has allowed us to just overcome these hurdles a little bit. For instance, I remember when I was a kid, when we had our first walkie-talkie, because my dad was a little bit of he was an electrician by trade, so he was into that kind of stuff. And it was like this big oblong thing, this huge antenna, and we go into the garden, beep beep beep, can you hear me? And just see how far we could go. Nowadays they're really small. They can be pretty powerful. So there's a lot of technology out there. There's technology out there. There's apps you can install. I'm blanking on the names, but where, for instance, it's there's no cell phone signal. There's no Wi-Fi, but you have Bluetooth, which extends it for X amount of meters. If there's a bunch of people or a bunch of devices that buy, they automatically pass along the message encrypted from one phone to the next. For instance, on cruises, this is often what happens is that everybody installs the app and you can just send messages to each other. And just as you're walking around, these get distributed, not necessarily instantly, but it happens. So if you're with a bunch of people, you don't have to be, maybe you don't want to be yelling the whole time up and down the house, wherever you live. But let's say that there's somebody somewhere who's going to be paying attention on what goes is happening outside, that you can communicate even if Wi-Fi is down, even if cell phone is down. So these kind of things exist, and we've never had such an amount of technology available, even at just civilian level, and not necessarily expensive. And then, as you say, combine that with working on your social skills and just communication skills. I think it was Warren Buffett who was asked, the number one advice he could give anybody. And he said, work on your communication skills, because that you can bring it everywhere with you and it gives you such an advantage. I would say that whenever there's a situation in which things are tense, difficult, whether it's a natural disaster, war, or austerity hits us because of the energy crisis, is your communication skills amongst yourselves, but especially with other people, will be a big part of how well you live through all that.
Excellent. And I'm just going to use this as an illustration now. We said we were going old school. I've got this piece of paper that I've written on. So signaling, the hard stuff. I'm never without a pen and notepad, ever, or pencil and notepad. And the amount of times that's been so useful, and also no one else has one, because they'll use their phones or this and the other. But we need to leave a note somewhere. We were meant to meet somewhere. We're going to move on. Or just write something down or record information quickly or whatever. We've moved so far into the technology that everything's going to be electronic and tech. You forget that, a whiteboard markers, permanent markers, pen, paper, all of that is really valid. And I use the example about tooting the car horn just to a pre-agreed signal. That's, people have got away from it. Oh, I'm at the car. How am I going to let my partner know it's safe to come down? You've got a signaling device right there if you choose to avail yourself of it. So this is where we start to get a little bit more expansive thinking of not just relying on technology to save us the whole time. Okay. Another two-part one, medical and hygiene. Now, what's interesting here is this is the reactive and this is the proactive. Okay. So medical and hygiene trips off the tongue much nicer, which is why it's written that way. But actually what we want to stack on this pillar is hygiene, keeping clean, keeping fresh, keeping disease free. But if that doesn't work, then medical. Okay, I've got to have the ability to kind of treat a variety of different things, either known medical conditions, and that's up to including pre-stocking prescription medications or whatever the case may be, as well as general first aid and possibly beyond, depending on the level of compromised civil infrastructure. But knowing with a suitably cautious and calculated approach, I shouldn't be getting those medical problems in the first place because they're highly undesirable. So I want a very proactive, preventative approach here. That's going back to our water storage. How much have we got in order to wash our hands, flush our toilet, clean our dishes? These are the things you can skip them. And in hours, you will start to get problems. Okay. If you've stocked 2.5 liters per person per day of water and somebody starts to get diarrhea and vomiting, right, you're giving them your entire share and that's just going to purge right through them like it wasn't even there. All right. It doesn't mean we're going to quadruple our water to back up for that contingency. What we're going to say is we want to be really, really careful and attentive to our hygiene routines. And this is where it gets challenging because this is where we take everything for granted. I turn on the tap, hot water, soapy stuff. It's clean, job done. Put the kids in the bath. They're clean, job done, everything away. And, now that I'm having to source the water, heat it, clean it manually by hand, it's really easy to get lazy. I do it in the morning. I'll boil the water and it'll be fine. And then all of a sudden you start to get these gastrointestinal issues or that small cut that now turns into an infection, which turns into a major issue. All start with these tiny, humble beginnings, let alone the major things. I got the fire and I got 3rd-degree burns on my arm now, and there's no way getting to the hospital. Great. There's like 50 liters of water done just to cool that injury to even start to treat it. Okay. So hugely preventative approach. And this is where we're also starting to bring this concept that it now has to be that knowledge as well as equipment, right? I can go and buy the inside of an ambulance if I want to, effectively in this day and age. That does not mean I have any clue how to utilize it. Okay. So this is where we're starting to invest not only in things, physical things, but in that knowledge, that training, that understanding. Okay.
Yeah, this is one that I would think that a lot of people having lived through the pandemic now should understand. Remember the first wave of the pandemic, where hospitals were in many cases overrun, that they had zero rooms, that they had patients lying and dying in the hallways, and to stack them in the parking lots, the bodies. And I'm not exaggerating one bit. This is all stuff you can look up if you forgot, because as we talked about on Monday, people seem to have forgotten a lot of stuff that happened not only 2 years ago in the beginning of the pandemic. So I would think that for most people, if society becomes more difficult and services are either less available or not available, you don't want to end up in the hospital. So let's start, like you said, by not doing all the stupid stuff that gets you in the hospital, but at the same time, understand what that means. And we're still seeing that. Talk to doctors now. They are seeing injuries and cancers that they haven't seen in over a decade. Why? Because people didn't go to the hospital out of fear, or they couldn't get an appointment during the first wave of the pandemic, and then the months following afterwards. And then the whole medical infrastructure, for instance, where I live, is still catching up to what happened. My girlfriend needed an appointment with a doctor. Nothing too serious, but it was relatively urgent. Yeah, June next year was the answer. And she said, no, it's actually quite urgent. Please, can I call her? And then, it was sorted out for a week or two afterwards. But this is not uncommon here, right? So imagine that for everything, for emergencies as well, is that all of a sudden you can't go to the hospital. Or if you go, it's going to cost you so much, or the care will be maybe inadequate because they run out of supplies. For those who don't remember, Belgium didn't have a face mask supply anymore because they got rid of it because it took up too much space a year or two, if I'm not mistaken, before the pandemic hit, and then there weren't any. So they couldn't offer them to anybody, and they were reserved mostly for medical personnel and emergency personnel and so on. The point is that you can have one thing that is missing in this case, a pandemic of a virus that breaks out, is that, well, we need face masks. Well, they're not there. We don't have them. So imagine with all the problems that we could run into on various levels, that you want to avoid being dependent on going to a hospital or getting to a doctor if you can manage that by yourself. But like you said, that takes not just the tools, but also the skills to use them correctly.
And it can even be the basics on that, Wim. Like we're saying now, we're highly advising that people have pulse oximeters, blood pressure monitors, and thermometers in their kits. On the basis, those figures might not mean much to you, but in this now telemedical conferencing, a lot of options on that now, we are with apps and things like that, that you just end up calling into a healthcare professional, typically a nurse, to triage you in the first place. That information is really vital to them. That if you can just take it, a lot of these devices are automated. If you could just be like, yeah, I put this thing on this person's finger and it's giving me this readout, that at least means something to them.
Yeah.
But they're not there to take that reading. Same with the blood pressure, same with the thermometer. So, it doesn't mean you need to go out and sign up for nursing school tomorrow, but just those basic things can make such a profound difference as you're reaching out to the resources and support that you've got. And actually, this last time I took my my little son to the hospital, that was exactly where we started, was on this app of medical app. Spoke to the nurse, spoke to the doctor. And I said that to the doctor. I was like, listen, we've got all these things at home. Do you want me to do these vital reads? And I understand what all the readings mean. I'm being very nice and different and professional now. And she was like, yes, that's great. So then we got the vitals down. I'd been monitoring for 20 minutes while we were in the queue and waiting. And I was like, this is like the 4 times track back. And she was like, yeah, on the basis of those readings, take him immediately to the ER. And I'm actually going to call ahead of you so the ER knows that you're coming in. Don't call an ambulance. That's an hour away. Yeah. Right, for us. So she was like, yeah, get in the car and you take him, because you could sit there and wait an hour and the ambulance can drive 40 minutes back, or in 45 minutes you can be at the hospital with them anticipating your arrival. So we got the best resolution to that situation, can we say, for want of a better word. Excellent. All right, then the final one, personal safety. In the first iteration of this model, this was actually self-defense. Okay. But then we quickly realized, as we discussed it and trained it in more, it was much more well-rounded than that. So it's definitely self-defense, it's in there, but we need to think in an off-grid situation or a disaster situation, it's much more about just defending myself from an intrapersonal threat. It can be has toxic leaks, hazardous substances in the area that I need to have PPE to protect myself from. It can be there's an inordinate amount of rubble, debris, broken glass lying around that I'm now walking over. Do I want my steel toe cap boots or do I want my gym shoes in that circumstance? Okay. Real easy tip on this one, a great rule of thumb that we work with. Anything that can protect or enhance your senses is well worth considering adding into your preparedness. Okay. So protective eyeglasses, hearing protection, breathing protection, gloves, whether that be biological protection or like super heavy duty work gloves that I can go through the rubble now without sort of risk getting damaged or hurt. Heavy duty clothing suitable for the environment, not only the weather, but also the terrain. These are the things that are that more well-rounded aspect of personal safety, if that makes sense. Okay. So it's not just about the sort of fight or flight stuff, which is obviously very, very important. But it's rounding it out to be more acknowledging there's additional threats in your area above and beyond just people. Now, this is a 200-hour conversation on its own, as is all of these pillars. I know this is a topic close to your heart, Wim, so I'm going to finish off with that's effectively the end of the model from my viewpoint. This is what we've been building over the last hour, and I'm just going to let you go a little bit of the personal safety to close out because because you like it.
Well, it is kind of the thing that I talk about a lot. So many years ago, when the Walking Dead TV series came out, I wrote a blog post about that. And one of my points was that if you think that's how it's going to be, you're mistaken, because obviously it's fiction and it has to adhere to a storyline, a story arc, and a narrative, and it needs to be pleasing to the camera and blah blah blah. But there were some interesting elements in that, and I would suggest people watch a few episodes if you like, if that's your thing. But most of all, the point is, whatever idea you have of violence right now, so this is how I think violence happens in the world, it is likely to be incorrect once things start breaking down. Whether you think it's extreme violence, if that's the world you live in a really rough part of town or city or whatever, and you're constantly at risk of gang violence and criminal violence and so on, or if you live in the safest neighborhood and you never encounter it, regardless, it is likely to be very different. If you live in gang territory and the way of surviving there is to never let any slight or insult just happen unanswered, perceived or otherwise insult, well, in a different context in which society breaks down, if that's your reaction, that you've got a chip on your shoulder and anybody who looks at you cross, you're going to go at them, you're not going to last all that long. And if you've been living an extremely safe life and you end up thinking, well, people are good in nature and this and that, you're also unlikely to live through this very well, because people in the end will resort to survival instincts, which means that it's about me surviving and by extension, my loved ones, my family and my spouse and so on. And that does not include you. So if they have to make a choice, well, yes, and I'm going to turn it into something really, really nasty. But let's say that you live somewhere, it's getting pretty bad out there, okay? And you are in need of food because your supply is running low, but you've been working together with a small community, maybe a neighbor or two, and things are going well. And things are really getting, the collaboration goes well so far, but everybody's under strain and there's not a lot of resources left. And you need some food and the neighbor has food. And he kind of lets you understand that he's willing to give you some extra if your wife is kind to him, if you know what I mean. What do? Because you've got 2 kids. You say yes, do you say no? Or what if he says, if you are kind to him, because he's always his eye on you, what do? So these are the kind of things that when we talk about personal safety and self-defense and so on, in normal society, you might get really outraged at that suggestion and start throwing punches, or at the very least never talk to that person again. But in a different context, that is a very, very difficult question to answer. Again, it's not about what you feel, it's not about what you think, it's about survival. Can you say to that person, like, screw you and I'll never talk to you again, knowing that, okay, this ends the collaboration. This means that we're on our own now, and we don't have any food and he has some. Or do you just say, okay, that's fine, you can go ahead with whatever problems that will bring next? Or do you look for a different solution and so on? Do you negotiate? And what is your position in that negotiation? And then we get back to communication skills. So this is a very uncomfortable thing to think about, especially when there's no need to think about it. For most people right now, they're still doing fine. But the reason why I bring it up is that, like you said, there's, personal safety, there's so much more to than just self-defense moves and all that kind of stuff. But a lot of it has to do with your mindset, the way you view people, society, interacting with others, and basically prioritizing what is the most important thing. Dying a heroic death, or making sure that you get back to your family and can provide for them until times get better. That was it.
On that cheerful note, that's one of the motivations to be well prepared, isn't it? It's these preparedness efforts are basically an investment to buy you time to make informed decisions. So hopefully you're not in that position that you've run out of food and you're now having to go out and try to source it in that way and come across those problems. That's the whole premise of why we would prepare, is to basically buy our time to see what's happening and to make informed decisions, as everybody else is running around and panicking because they didn't prepare. And that's going right back to that beginning. The height of these pillars is effectively, how long can I just close my door and lock it for and be completely self-sufficient within my situation? Okay. And that's going to be down to your assessment of the problems that you're likely to face and encounter in your personal circumstances in the near future. This is obviously a huge subject with way more to go into. We've done the foundational model justice in this conversation we've had today. And if we were to talk anymore, I know we'd end up going and going and going. So I think we'll be disciplined today and sort of just stop there. And hopefully that's been helpful to people. They've got the article, which is very easy and quick to read through. But now with this presentation, you've also just got like that contextual flesh on those bones of where did that come from? What are we meaning with that? So fingers crossed it's of use to people. And I would finish today by just really encouraging people to, if any of this has resonated with you at all, clearly commit to, within the next 24 hours, get started. You still have time to be prepared. Even if you're prepared, be prepared more. If you're not prepared at all, start preparing, because you have time right now. But do it in this sequential, logical manner, building up each pillar at a time. Okay.
Yeah. And the one thing I would say in closing is that, really emphasize that you prepare according to what you can do, what is appropriate for your situation and context and so on, which we don't know who you are when you're listening to this or watching this on video. So you might say like, okay, all this kind of stuff, I've got this squared away, or I'm fine already. Or you might be going like, holy crap, I never thought about any of this. I need to get started. And the individual details there are so many variables possible. So there's no way for us to talk about that or tell you how far you have to take things. For some of you, it's going to be just fine if you pretty much ignore everything we do, because that will happen too. There will be people who will be just fine. Because they live so remotely already, for instance, that it's not going to be an issue. And there's others who are pretty much out of luck if they don't get started right away, and anything in between. And once again, nobody knows the future. Nobody knows how bad it will get, or if it will, and how long it will take. Now, I would refer again to the main episode that we recorded on Monday, that I'll also link to in the show notes here, is let's say that the signs are not positive right now. I think that is putting it mildly. If you look from 2019, 2020, 2021, and now 2022, can you say that things have gotten a whole lot better year over year, or have they gotten a whole lot worse? And I would put my money on the latter, is that things are kind of escalating and speeding up. It's going faster and faster. So like Toby said, you still have time. In Europe, not much though, because temperatures are dropping. This is the first day that I couldn't go outside and have my coffee in my t-shirt in the morning. It was like, it's getting colder. And I've been tracking the weather report. It is getting colder. So we could be in a situation in a week or two, maybe, that we get sub-zero temperatures. And then if you haven't prepared for anything back then and you get rolling blackouts in wherever you live, it's going to be pretty late to get started on your preparation, because everybody will panic then. And you don't want to be stuck in that panic. All right, that's it. Great success, as Borat would say. I didn't think we ranted. I think we kept it like pretty much on point.
Yeah. It's just it's a lot to unpack, unfortunately. Yeah. So as much as you aspire, like, you can do it in a half an hour and it does it no justice, because people like, I've no idea what I'm meant to do. So I think this was a good enough tempo to sort of give them a context and a frame on each part, along with the article, to be like, okay, you know, then I see what you're getting at a little bit here, you know, which is all we can do. I mean, that's all we've got right now, is the ability to try to help people see what their options are. And, you know, we're all squared away. So if they don't take our advice, that's on them, not us.
and for the people listening, I mean, this is what you do as a living. I mean, this is your job, right? Teaching this to people, like how to freaking survive, teaching this to companies, teaching this to the big shot CEOs, teaching to people who want to go off to in the Arctic on expeditions, like that stuff. This is not theoretical knowledge for what you're giving. This is hardware advice. And then for the people who don't know who Selko is, I would very much advise looking into his background. He lived through a wartime situation where everything was basically it went to hell in a handbasket really quickly, and then you have to like deal with it, right? So the kind of information that Toby just gave everybody here listening is, I mean, it's worth its weight in gold. So I'm extremely grateful again to you, Toby, that you take the time for the audience to share this, and then just tell them like, okay, get started, folks. Do what you need to do. And
this is what you've got right now. Do something with it, you know, invest your time, energy, and resources wisely, because you can.
Okay. I'm going to pretty much end it here. So very quickly, everybody, this is the main episode about the 7 pillars. There's another episode linked to in the show notes where Toby and I go off on a lot of other stuff as well. And then there's a bonus episode on Patreon where we really take the gloves off, and there might be some cursing left and right, but we also answer a bunch of questions from my patrons. I'll put links to the article, the 7 pillars, also in the show notes, so you can find all this stuff and listen to it again, read it again, and so on. And hopefully I hope nobody needs this, but if you do, at the very least, you know where to start. All right, that's it. I'm going to stop recording. Thank you so much, Toby.
Thank you, guys.